Wednesday, October 6th, 2021, and this is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearing. There's 4 cases on the agenda. The first RPC is 170011011, property located at 1000 Wilson Boulevard. I understand, Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon, that you want to withdraw this and accept the county's number. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, any objection, Mr. Peralta?
The original number, correct?
Ms. Borman, the original
That's
number?
correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, then I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Matskin is a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous, 6-0. The withdrawal is accepted. The second RPC is 34024341. This property is located at 1480 Crystal Drive. And Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Chris, good morning. 1480 Crystal Drive is the Crown Plaza National Airport Hotel. This property is part of a select group of hotels in the county because of its reliance on business travelers and airport traffic. It is a fly-to hotel and not a drive-to hotel. The property relies on airline traffic, airport staff, and airport business travelers. NOI at the property decreased 131% in 2020 from 2019. For some context as to why this hotel is different from others in the county and should be evaluated as such. This property, again, caters to business travelers. We have the 2019 and 2020 data from the property on occupied room nights and revenue generated from each category of guest at this hotel. In 2019, over 69% of the hotel's occupied room nights were business travelers. This fell to 52% in 2020. At the same time, leisure travel through third-party aggregators, which is the least profitable segment with an ADR that is only 45% of the ADR of business travelers, increased from 2% of room nights in 2019 to 17% of room nights in 2020. This is over an 850% increase. This shift in type of traveler decreases revenue while requiring the same expenses per occupied room night. Revenue from business travel in 2020 was at an ADR of $122.58 versus $54.55 for third-party aggregators. However, the expenses required for each of these types of travelers remains the same. Additionally, the rack rate at the property fell by 46% in 2020, while the number of room nights at the rack rate increased by 56% in 2020. This also reduces revenue while maintaining expenses based on occupied room nights. The shift to less profitable bookings results in a large loss to revenue. However, again, the operating expenses are not affected since the services required to operate a hotel are tied to occupancy and not the type of guest. So while revenue per guest has fallen significantly, operating expenses per guest have not. And if we are going to assume occupancy at the assessed rate of 71%, we must assume expenses based on the same occupancy rate, not as a percent of revenue as the assessment has done. The clientele at this property is shifting from higher margin business travelers to lower margin aggregator travelers. We look at the actual time of booking provided by the client. Pre-pandemic bookings were made an average of 60 days before the stay. During 2020, and as of the date of value, this figure has fallen to an average of 5 days. Clearly, this property's type of traveler that patronizes the property has shifted. This shift, again, is to less profitable leisure travelers and is likely to remain over the next few years given the headwinds faced by business travel. The shift to online virtual meetings for business is seismic and will have a measurable effect on the property's operations. To assume business travel will reach pre-pandemic levels in 2021 or shortly thereafter is highly speculative. Finally, the property is next to National Airport, which further impacts the potential revenue. Air travel into National Airport was down 79% year over year as of October 2020. As of the date of value, any assumption of a return to normal for this business travel reliant property is highly speculative. To summarize, a shift from high margin business travel to low margin leisure travel reduces revenue, but results in the same operating expenses per room night. The decreased revenue but steady operating expenses created by the shift in type of traveler leads to a much lower NOI. The county's test column has revenue lower than 2018-2019 at the average 2018-2019 occupancy of 71%, while imputing expenses as a percentage of revenue based mirroring the same 2019 operating expense percentage of revenue. As I've just discussed, this fails to capture the true level of operating expenses required for the number of room nights occupied. At a minimum, the 2019 actual reported expenses should be used for the revised assessment. This results in a decrease of $138,000 to NOI, which when capitalized at the county's cap rate is $1.619 million. And thank you. And Eileen, I believe you have something you'd like to add? Eileen, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. You know, I think it's also interesting to look at the column D as it compares to column F. And based on the information in column D, the county did recognize that operating expenses are increasing and used $10,935,000. That is much more realistic when it comes to looking at the operating expenses that are going to be incurred for a property operating at 71% occupancy. Given the information that the county had at the time it made the assessment, and given the information that it used when preparing, they had 18 and 19 when they made the 21 assessment, but yet they reduced the operating expenses substantially. As Mr. Harmon has said, the operating expenses at this property are not going to change based on the type of guest. The other thing I just want to touch on is previously, Mr. Bailey has mentioned two sales in Arlington. One of them is the sale to Amazon that completed the 11.6 acre site that is known as Penn Place. And the other sale is the Americana, which was purchased for redevelopment and had actually approvals in place for apartments at the time of sale. The Amazon sale is coded as not a market transaction, and the other one is in the county system as not a coded sale. So I think it's somewhat disingenuous to hear that. The other thing I'd like to mention, in addition to the expenses, which clearly should be much higher, is the fact that as a percent of appeals, you know, Mr. Chicas mentioned last week that the county had heard 30 board cases on hotels. There's only 44 hotels in the county. Of those, I would say at least 75% have appealed. I don't think there's any other property class in the county where 75% of people have filed appeals. And clearly there is something that is amiss. I'd actually like to ask you to use the original expenses that were used by the county in preparing the assessment and the revised income, because in fact, the revised income well overstates what can be achieved, but the expenses do not at a 71% occupancy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chicas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Ms. Borman. Good morning, Mr. Harmon. Just to start there, this property filed last year. It filed in 2018. I think it files in perpetuity. Almost all of our hotels file every year, so I don't think that has any standing on 2020 or beyond. It's just, again, it's a metric of looking at how many hotels there are and their propensity to file to the board or for review. So it's not that strange that all of them filed in 2020. Can possibly have Irving look and see how many filed in 2019 if that's for some reason something the board's interested in. So again, we're looking at Crown Plaza. The board is very familiar how I look at these. We're looking at the summary sheet. We'll note that the appellant actually used the numbers from 2019, as has been done in previous cases, made a 2-year adjustment below the line, equivalent to 138% of the revenue achieved in 2020. Again, we've stated before, we believe a 2-year adjustment on an annual assessment is incorrect methodology. Regardless, this called for a decrease of 57% year over year, far too big of a bite, regardless of what happened in 2020. The county did make an adjustment, as noted by Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon, noting that the decrease in revenue as well as the decrease in NOI. We matched not only the decrease in revenue, but are very much in play with what's been going on at the property. We heard the word speculation repeatedly, and then they use speculative comments about what's going to happen with expenses. We think it makes much more sense to look at the operating history as portrayed in this summary sheet. This is what's been achieved at the property. There's no speculation needed. When you look at the total revenue, if you take the time to look at averages over the years 17, 18, 19, with 20 essentially being an informational wash, years 17, 18, and 19 showed that the county is actually low on revenue. Taking a look at operating expenses, 17, 18, and 19, you'll see that the county is actually high on operating expenses. You'll take a look at the net operating income for 17, 18, 19, you'll see that the county again is low. We've made this adjustment uniformly. We've made this throughout the year. Full service and select service got a negative 65% of total revenue. This was reflective of the TOT numbers that were reported to the county. Again, this was done in a uniform manner. All hotel properties of full service and select service nature were treated this way. We did make this adjustment prudently, again, in reflection of the 2020 drop, and more importantly, in reflection of the years 17, 18, and 19, the reflective NOI drop. We did call for a 31% drop year over year. And I would note, for what it's worth, this property was purchased 24 years ago for $25,750,000. So the idea that the appellants believe it's dropped below what it sold for 24 years ago based off of 1 year, I think would be disheartening even to the owner, whom we actually met with last year around this time. So I wouldn't put words in his mouth, and it's conjecture on my part, but I don't believe that the owner himself would think that it dropped 57% in 1 year. That being said, again, as Mr. Harmon noted, and no speculation needed, it is well placed across essentially across the highway from the airport. It's right in the thick of things with regards to Amazon and all the new builds that are going on there. A lot of new apartments coming into place. I think has been noted by Mr. Lawson in previous case, Arlington population is up some 14%. As far as population and tourism, it set records in 2018 and again in 2019 for those visiting Arlington County. There was some anticipation that that record would be broken again in 2020. Obviously, COVID changed that dramatically. I would note, again, we've done this change uniformly with a negative 65% of total revenue. This has been done uniformly with all the other full service and select service properties. We did make an adjustment which reflected in a negative 31% adjustment year over year. That being said, we do believe the revision of $28,179,000 should be confirmed. Irving, anything to add?
I guess I'll speak to the 2 hotel sales that was mentioned. The reference to those 2 sales was because of a last case in which the appellant asked for the property to be valued less than the land. So that's why I mentioned these 2 sales, because clearly these 2 sales were purchased for their land. They were well above what the property was assessed for, and that was the reason why those sales were mentioned. That was also stated during that particular hearing as to why I was mentioning those 2 sales. And I also informed the board that earlier in the year in the BOE briefing and during that case, that we did not use those sales to adjust land. We chose to wait to see if we see any more sales come in. And we do have 2 sales that came in this year. So hopefully that'll help us for 2022. That's all. Thank you.
We're available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, for the applicant, are any of these rooms historically leased out to the airlines?
Yes. In fact, there are no contracts as of January 1, 2021, and there are currently no contracts, but yes, a number of the rooms were leased out to at least one airline at the that operated out of National, it was JetBlue.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Metzgen.
For the applicant, I have two quick questions. First one is, and you might have said this and I just didn't capture it. There's less business travel this past year, but visitors travel who pay less per night wasn't as nearly affected. Do you have a notion what the total amount of guests were, forgetting about what they paid, just numbers of people, meaning occupied rooms, year over year?
Jordan can get that for you.
I have it.
You have it?
Yeah. Yes, sir. So occupied rooms 2019 were just under 78,000. That fell to just over 39,000 in 2020.
Okay, great. Thanks. So
Mr. Matzke, if I can just clarify that and make sure of something. Now, that is in fact what happened, and that is why the income is down so low in 2020 and the operating expenses as well. I think, though, what I want to be sure of is that the DREA revision is based on the figure. Jordan, what would 71,000 rooms, 71% rooms be? So the DREA figure is not based on an occupancy of 38,000 nights. The DREA occupancy is based on a room number of about 70,000, and Jordan can give you that.
Right.
71% occupancy.
Yeah, which is what you, in case you made up in office buildings. But that leads me directly to my second quick question on operating expenses. The test, column F, shows about a 1% decrease in operating expenses from 2019. 2020, of course, is an odd year, and we can't use that as the baseline. So in your appeal, you're talking a lot about how operating expenses ought to, stay up even if revenue goes down because it's based on occupied rooms. And I'm assuming, but I just don't see, I didn't, you were emphasizing that, and I don't see very, very little difference between what the county estimated and what your actuals were historically, last several years. And of course, they've been growing over time.
Well, the difference between 10,655,000 and 10,793,000 is a substantial difference. 10,655,000 is what is in column F for expenses, and 10,793,000 is what is in column C for expenses.
So it's about 2.5%. Yeah.
But if you capitalize that amount, that's over $1 million. Jordan, what was that number that you said?
It's over 1.6 million capitalized.
So that is substantial.
In assessment. Okay, good. That you addressed it. Thank you. Your answer was better than my question.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Metzgen, I would point out Mr. Harmon and Ms. Borman talked about the expenses, but not about the income. Again, they're calling for a higher income than the county is. So while they're calling for higher expenses, they're calling for a higher income. Just look at the column. If you take their number, their NOI, you take the indicated cap rate, which they're not arguing, and then you take the below the line adjustment, and then you take an appropriate 1 year adjustment, their value is actually higher than the county's. So it's, as we've said all year, it's a matter of, is this a 1 year adjustment or a 2 year adjustment? We're an annual assessment. Let's use a 1 year adjustment. If we're going to do that, then it makes more sense to look at the reflection that the county's made in the revision. We're lower than the average for revenues. We're higher than the average for expenses. We're lower than the average for NOI. We've reflected the downturn in revenue. We've reflected the downturn in NOI. We've been uniformly accurate in reflecting this below the line adjustment. We do believe that the negative 31% year over year reflection should be confirmed in the revision value of $28,179,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to center on what the argument here is. Mr. Chikas keeps referring back to our pro forma column, which was submitted at the beginning of the year. The county has since made a revision. We have also revised our arguments based on that revision. It is disingenuous to say the county gets a second bite at the apple, but we do not. So that is what the arguments here today have been. If you recall, I was speaking to expenses in the test column. I was not speaking to support of a 2-year deduction below the line. So the argument is expenses in the county's revised test column are not high enough to accurately reflect the occupancy assumed by the county's test column. Now, as to speculation, Mr. Chikas spoke to us using speculation on revenue and expenses. We have the 2019 and 2020 actual occupied room nights and revenue from this property. That is what we're speaking to. We are not speculating that the ADR from third-party aggregators is much lower than business travelers, and those populations have shifted in stays at the hotel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board members. What do folks think about? Mr. Metzgen.
This is among us. It seems what we're doing here is typical for mass appraisal, and that is projecting an assumed occupancy and therefore assumed revenues and therefore assumed operating expenses. We do it on office spaces all the time, office buildings all the time, because there's a lot more of them that appeal than hotels. And at first I was a little flummoxed because, revenues, not only occupancy down, but the dollars per room is down even more. And so overall, but I realized where I started, no, we're assuming as I was given 71%. And so then I look at column F, and all of a sudden I see that the adjustment is, of course, as per usual, below the line. But the assumptions we have based on recent years, because we don't know yet whether 2020 is an anomaly or a new trend, particularly for airport hotels, in other words, are there going to be fewer higher paying office fly-in conference business? We don't care what we pay guests, or is it going to be more tourists who are on much more of a conscious budget? We don't know yet. So it seems to me that the test is a worthy attempt to regularize trends until we find out if there's a new trend. So I'm in the position where I was last week in the last airport hotel, that although things look bleak, we don't quite yet know. But again, my guess is, based on reading surveys, that the game has changed for airport hotels. It's going to be a lot fewer conferences and higher paying guests, and therefore lower paying budget conscious people. But we're not there yet. Maybe next year we'll know a bit more.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with Ken just a little bit. Ken, I think that the issue is below the line. I agree with you on that. I agree with Mr. Chikas. And the county has selected the 65% for 1 year. And I guess you could say, well, it should be more than 1 year, or you could say the 65% is not appropriate. What I have noticed or seen, and I think we can take this back to January 1, is yes, the pandemic is still out there, but what I have seen reported quite a bit is, even if the pandemic ceases, the employees just don't want to go back to work, and they want to continue to be, in their home. And as I look at the screen, I think everybody except for maybe myself is in their home rather than their office. And, I think, it's speculative. It's going to work out. It's only 1 year. It's speculative. It'll be 2 years. It's speculative. everything's speculative. And so I think we have to make kind of an educated guess. And I think that perhaps the adjustment that would be appropriate is below the line. And I don't think we should go to 2 years, but I think the 65% is probably inadequate. So that's my thinking. I'll see if anyone agrees.
Okay. Just to clarify, I'm in the office I've worked in for 20 years. And I believe Mark is as well, and Greg.
10 years.
I don't know
Me
about
too.
Panorama, but I believe everybody's working where they've always worked. But other comments? Mr. Panorama.
Well, I think the county has done like this, with all the other hotels, a good job as reconstructing this. Everything that we're looking at based on this summary sheet is lower than 2019. It's lower than what the appellant is proposing. And just to take one number, just the expenses, just to transfer to, I agree with Mr. Chicas. We would have to take the income into consideration also. We can't just take one number because it looks better or it makes it better. And for purposes of equalizing every other hotel that we've seen or we've had as an appeal, I think the 65%, was used, and I think we have to continue with that. In my opinion, it's an appropriate number. So I'm okay with the revised assessment. I don't see any problem with it.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here real quick, and then we'll come back to you. I tend to agree with you. I know that there's a Project Journey that the airport has right now, and they're getting ready. They're already using it, but they're unveiling the new security checkpoint and the new concourse. They've added a new airline to the airport. So it is very speculative of what this year's numbers are going to look like. So I tend to lean towards the county's revision. But Mr. Yates, you had a comment?
We had a lot of discussion when we first started seeing the hotels about the 65%. And I think we all agreed that it's not a guaranteed number, but it's something we're going to have to look at next year. And it's going to probably have to be looked at for the next couple of years. But it's the number that we are using, the county came up with. We discussed it. We agreed that that's what we're going to stick with. And I think we have to look at this annually. And just as a side note with this too, bringing up airline contracts, I was out of town this weekend and I actually, someone I know is a Delta executive. They are not signing the contracts with hotels because I asked him specifically, and he said that what they're doing, they don't know where the pandemic's going, but they're still flying and still using those hotels as if they had the contracts. They also said the airlines are packed. They just don't have as many planes flying. But it's not that they don't have the contracts. They're still using the hotels just the same. And the same ones, he said, that they always contracted with. Anyway, just a note.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawson, did you have something to finish? Okay. All right, so Mr. Hoffman, you're the only one we haven't heard from. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sorry, I had to call in earlier because my network went down, so I was on the cell phone listening. But I'm okay with the county. I just think 90,000 a key, pretty good location, pretty good concrete structure, pretty good long-term trajectory for the area. You could take 3-4 years and say you're going to lose $1 million, $1.5 million a year, and add all that up, and you're still, under 120,000 a key coming out of this thing in 2024, 2025. So, at a very high level, I think this is something that the owners are holding on to, and they're gonna ride it out, and they've got a good property, and the assessment's probably low, if you ask me.
Okay. All right, Mr. Metzgen.
Very quick note. This is pretty much the percentage of decrease from last year that we've been seeing in hotels, which is important to keep in mind. They have the stereotypical situation going on, and they have this stereotypical reduction facing them. I don't know that we can do better than that.
Okay. All right. Well, with that all being said, then I'm going to move to accept the county's revised number of 28,179 even. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Penaranda is the second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's 5-1 with the exception of Mr. Lawson. The county's revised number is confirmed, 28,179,000 even. Thank you. Moving on to the next case. I believe we still have all the same players. RPC 140600078, the property at 650 North Quincy Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Eileen, Eileen, you're
I
muted.
think we're done.
Eileen, you're muted again.
I don't understand why it keeps automatically muting, but that being said, the county has a proposed revised value on this property, and the appellant is okay with that proposed revised value.
Okay. Is there any objection from Mr. Chikas? I've lost him.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No objection.
All right. So I guess then we'll consider that a withdrawn. So that was done today. All right. So I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Lawson, all in favor of accepting the withdrawal?
I'm sorry, Mary, I think this is really not a withdrawal. They're asking for a reduction. The county's asking for a reduction to the revised assessment.
Okay, it's a good point.
So if we withdraw, it's going to go back to the original assessment.
Okay, so then I will change my motion to, we will accept the county's revised number. And I'm trying to get the number. Of 53,193,600.
As a seconder, that's fine.
Okay, so that is 53,193,600. Okay, all in favor of that?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that's unanimous. The county's revised number is accepted at 53,193,600. And the fourth case is Economic Unit 1803702H, which I understand that was withdrawn yesterday. I assume no objection from the county.
It'll be a similar situation, ma'am, and I believe they accepted the revision.
They accepted the revision. Okay. When you send this, Ms. Borman, moving forward, you got to tell me which one you're doing, because if you, I want to make sure that the motion is correct. So
Not a problem. I thought we had notified
O2H. Okay, so that is the property located at 1401 North Adams Street.
Yes, ma'am.
And so the revised number is 51,504,600. So I'll move to accept the county's 51,504,600. Do I have a second on that?
Second that.
Okay. Mr. Penaranda, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. We'll accept the county's revision on that. Okay, well, that certainly completes the agenda quite quickly here this morning. Is there any other business from either board members or the county?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, Irving lost power, so he's off, but I don't think there's anything from the county.
Okay, all right.
No, that's all we have from the county. This is
okay. Thank you, Mr. Millman. Okay, then we stand adjourned at 9:36. I believe that's our earliest, and we will reconvene next Tuesday, the 12th at 9 a.m.
Thank you, board. Thank you, county.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rhonda, can you stay on a minute?
Sure.
I just want to make sure we've got something right. Thanks, everybody.